You're not exactly a priority right now, my mom texted as I sat alone at my promotion dinner. 3 hours later, my cousin posted, family night out for the real success story. It was my sister. She bought a jet ski. I paid the $2,300 bill, went home, and terminated the mortgage payments I'd been covering for 3 years. Then I left a note on their door. Let her pay it. By morning, I had 17 missed calls. I, 29M, sat alone at the corner table of Romano's, the fancy Italian place I'd booked 2 weeks in advance. The empty chairs around me seemed to mock the celebration I'd planned. After 6 years of grinding through late nights and weekend shifts, I'd finally made partner at the firm. The youngest in company history. This was supposed to be my moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. You're not exactly a priority right now. Sister needs support with her new venture. I stared at the message, my untouched pasta growing cold. 3 years of paying their mortgage. 3 years of being the reliable son who never asked questions when they needed money for repairs, property taxes, or Mom's medical bills after Dad passed. But tonight, when I needed them most, I wasn't a priority. The waiter approached cautiously, probably wondering why the guy in the expensive suit looked like someone had died. I told him to wrap everything up. $47 for a meal I couldn't stomach. Driving home, I kept checking my phone. Maybe they'd realized their mistake. Maybe Mom would call to apologize. Instead, at 9:30 p.m., my cousin posted on Instagram. Family night out for the real success story. The photo showed them at Ocean View Grill, the waterfront restaurant that cost twice what Romano's did. Mom, my sister, my uncle, my cousin, and my sister's boyfriend all raising glasses in celebration. The caption continued, celebrating our girl's amazing new jet ski purchase. Living her best life. A jet ski. They ditched my promotion dinner to celebrate a recreational vehicle. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and scrolled through more photos. Sister posing next to a gleaming red jet ski. Mom beaming with pride. Uncle giving a thumbs up. Everyone looked genuinely happy in a way they never seemed when I shared my achievements. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd spent years building a career that could actually support a family, they were celebrating something that would drain money rather than generate it. But apparently, that made her the real success story. I drove home to my empty apartment, the same modest place I'd kept for 3 years while paying their mortgage instead of upgrading my own life. The contrast felt sharper than ever. Their 4-bedroom house with the pool and 2-car garage, funded by my sacrifices, while I made do with less so they could live comfortably. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I calculated exactly how much money I'd given them over the years. The mortgage payments alone totaled $82,800. Add in the emergency repairs, property taxes, insurance help, and various small loans that never got repaid, and the number reached $127,000. More than enough for a substantial down payment on my own house. More than enough to have taken that European vacation I'd been postponing. More than enough to live the life I'd earned instead of subsidizing theirs. But the money wasn't really the issue. It was the complete dismissal of my accomplishments, the casual cruelty of that text message, and the realization that I'd been taken for granted for so long that my actual achievements had become invisible to them. I made 2 phone calls the next morning. First to my bank to stop the automatic transfer that covered their mortgage. 3 years of payments, never missed, never late. Done. Second to my attorney to draft a formal notice that I was terminating all financial support. Then I drove to their house, the house I'd been paying for, and taped a note to their front door. Since you've found your real success story, let her handle the real responsibilities. Mortgage payment terminated as of today. Let her pay it. Your son who apparently isn't a priority. I didn't stick around to see their reaction. I had work to do. Real work. The kind that had earned me a partnership while my sister was playing on jet skis. The first call came at 6:23 a.m. Mom, frantic. I let it go to voicemail. Then my sister, my uncle, my cousin. By 8 a.m., I had 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages ranging from confused to angry to desperate. Mom's voicemail was predictable. How could I be so cruel? They were family. They'd been celebrating my sister because she was going through a hard time after her breakup. The jet ski was therapy. I was being unreasonable and selfish. My sister's voicemail was more direct. I was a vindictive bastard who was trying to ruin their lives over one missed dinner. She'd pay me back every penny if I was going to be so petty about money. My uncle's message was the most interesting. He apologized for the dinner situation and said he'd tried to convince them to at least call me, but Mom insisted I'd understand. He seemed to grasp that this wasn't really about one dinner. I listened to all of them, then deleted every message without responding. At work, I found myself oddly focused. For the first time in years, I wasn't mentally calculating whether I could afford something after accounting for their expenses. I wasn't checking my phone for their latest financial emergency. I felt lighter, even as my phone continued buzzing throughout the day. The reality was simple: they'd made a choice. When presented with celebrating their son's career milestone or their daughter's recreational purchase, they'd chosen the latter. When forced to choose between including me in their family celebration or excluding me entirely, they'd chosen exclusion. They'd made their priorities clear. Now I was making mine clear too. Update 1. The weekend brought a new level of desperation. Saturday morning, my sister showed up at my apartment. I watched through the window as she pounded on my door for 10 minutes before giving up. Her calls became more frequent, more frantic. The jet ski, apparently, had been financed with the expectation that I'd continue covering their major expenses. Sunday afternoon brought Mom and my uncle together. They sat in their car outside my building for 2 hours. I knew they were there. My neighbor had texted me about the suspicious older folks in the parking lot. But I stayed inside, working on cases and enjoying the peace. Monday's voicemails revealed the first cracks in their united front. Mom admitted they'd made a mistake with the dinner but insisted it didn't warrant destroying the family. My sister's tone had shifted from anger to panic. She'd apparently called the bank about the mortgage and learned exactly how much I'd been paying. The most telling message came from my cousin, who hadn't been at the restaurant celebration after all. She'd seen the Instagram post and was confused about why they'd celebrated without me. Apparently, Mom had told everyone I was too busy with work to attend my sister's celebration. They'd all assumed I'd chosen not to come. The lie stung more than the original betrayal. Not only had they excluded me from their celebration of what they deemed real success, but they'd actively deceived the rest of the family about my absence. In their version of events, I was the workaholic who couldn't be bothered to support his sister. The truth, that they'd literally told me I wasn't a priority, never made it to the extended family. Tuesday brought a new strategy. My uncle called from Mom's house, putting me on speaker so the whole family could hear. They'd all gathered for an intervention, convinced that I'd lost my mind over a simple misunderstanding. My uncle explained how they saw the situation. Yes, they'd made poor choices about the dinner timing. Yes, Mom's text had been hurtful, but I was being disproportionately vindictive by cutting off support entirely. Family meant forgiveness. Family meant understanding that people make mistakes. Family meant not using money as a weapon. I broke my silence for the first time in 4 days. Speaking directly to my uncle, since he seemed to be the only one approaching this with any rationality, I told him they were right about one thing. Family did mean forgiveness and understanding. It also meant showing up for each other's important moments. It meant not lying to relatives about why someone was excluded, and it meant not taking each other's sacrifices for granted. I asked him to calculate how many family gatherings I'd missed over the past 3 years because I was working extra hours to afford their mortgage payments. I asked him to consider whether they'd ever acknowledged that my financial support meant I was living below my means while they lived above theirs. I asked him if he thought it was reasonable to expect unlimited financial support combined with conditional emotional support. The silence on the other end lasted nearly a minute. Finally, Mom spoke up, insisting that I'd never told them the mortgage payments were a burden. I'd volunteered to help after Dad died. I'd insisted they shouldn't worry about money during their grief. She was right, of course. I had volunteered. I had insisted they shouldn't worry. But I'd expected that generosity to be met with gratitude, not taken as an entitlement. I'd expected my sacrifices to earn me a place at their table, not just access to their bills. The conversation ended with my uncle promising to mediate further discussions. He seemed to understand that this had moved beyond a simple family spat into something more fundamental about respect and reciprocity. Update 2. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. My sister arrived at my office, somehow getting past security by claiming to be my wife with an emergency. She looked different, tired, stressed, older somehow. The confidence from the Instagram photos was gone. She sat across from my desk, and finally told me the truth about the jet ski purchase. It hadn't been a celebration of success or a therapeutic purchase after her breakup. It had been an impulsive decision made during a manic episode. She'd been struggling with bipolar disorder for 2 years, something the family had been hiding from me because they didn't want to burden me with another worry. The jet ski cost $18,000. She'd put $3,000 down and financed the rest, counting on my mortgage payments continuing so Mom could help with the monthly payments. The family dinner had been their attempt to celebrate and normalize what they knew was an irrational purchase, hoping to create a positive narrative around her impulsive spending. I sat there processing this information, feeling the anger slowly drain away and replace itself with something more complicated. They hadn't excluded me from celebrating some frivolous achievement. They'd excluded me from participating in what was essentially a family crisis intervention disguised as a celebration. But that almost made it worse. Not only had they hidden her diagnosis from me for 2 years, but they'd made major financial decisions based on their assumption that I'd continue paying their mortgage indefinitely. They'd treated me like an ATM with legs rather than a family member who might want to help with the actual problem. My sister broke down crying, admitting that she'd been resentful of my success for years. While I'd been building a career and making partner, she'd been struggling to hold jobs and manage her mental health. The family's decision to celebrate her purchase instead of my promotion had been their misguided attempt to boost her self-esteem at a moment when she desperately needed validation. None of this excused the cruelty of Mom's text or the lies they'd told extended family about my absence. But it provided context that changed how I understood their choices. They weren't just dismissing my achievements. They were prioritizing what they saw as my sister's more urgent needs. I told her about the mortgage payments, explaining exactly how much I'd been contributing to their household while living in my modest apartment. Her face went white as she realized the scope of my sacrifice and the financial impact of her impulsive purchase on the family's stability. For the first time in our adult lives, we had an honest conversation about money, mental health, family responsibilities, and the weight of unspoken expectations. She admitted that she'd always assumed I was helping because my income made it easy, never considering that I might be making sacrifices. I admitted that I'd been enabling their poor financial decisions by consistently bailing them out. She begged me to reconsider the mortgage payments, at least temporarily, while they figured out how to restructure their finances. The house was their primary asset, and losing it would devastate Mom, who'd already lost Dad and was now facing the possibility of losing her home too. I told her I'd think about it, but that any future financial arrangement would require complete transparency about the family's finances and decision-making. No more surprises. No more assumptions. No more treating me like a silent partner in their financial planning. Update 3. Thursday evening brought the conversation I'd been expecting since this whole situation started. Mom called and asked to meet in person, just the two of us, away from the family dynamics and intermediaries. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment, neutral ground, where we could speak honestly. She looked older than I'd realized, worn down by the stress of the past week, and probably by years of managing my sister's condition without adequate support. She started by apologizing, really apologizing, not just expressing regret about the consequences of her actions. She admitted that the text message had been inexcusably cruel. She'd been overwhelmed by my sister's needs and had responded defensively when I'd called about the dinner. She'd known even as she sent it that she was being unfair, but her protective instincts toward my sister had overridden her consideration for my feelings. More importantly, she acknowledged that they'd been taking my financial support for granted. What had started as temporary help during their grief had gradually become an expectation, then an assumption, then an entitlement. They'd stopped seeing my contributions as generous sacrifices and started seeing them as just how our family operated. The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. We talked about Dad's death and how it had destabilized their finances and emotional equilibrium. We talked about my sister's diagnosis and how expensive mental health treatment had become. We talked about my career success and how it had somehow made me seem invulnerable to them, less in need of family support. Mom revealed that they'd been afraid to tell me about my sister's bipolar disorder because they'd worried I'd stop helping financially if I knew how complex their situation really was. The irony was painful. Their attempt to protect their financial support had led to exactly the outcome they'd feared. I explained how isolating it had been to sacrifice my own financial goals for 3 years without any acknowledgement of what I was giving up. How their casual dismissal of my promotion had felt like confirmation that my achievements only mattered to them when they generated income that could benefit the family. We talked about the Instagram post and how devastating it had been to see them celebrating what they'd called the real success story while I sat alone at my planned celebration dinner. Mom finally understood that this wasn't about the money. It was about feeling valued and respected by the people who mattered most to me. The conversation ended with a tentative agreement. I would resume the mortgage payments for 6 months while they developed a sustainable financial plan. My sister would sell the jet ski and use the proceeds to help cover household expenses. Most importantly, all family financial decisions would be transparent going forward, and my contributions would be treated as temporary assistance rather than permanent obligations. But the relationship had fundamentally changed. The easy assumption that family meant unlimited mutual support had been replaced by something more honest, but more fragile. We'd learned that love wasn't enough without respect, and that sacrifice without acknowledgement bred resentment rather than gratitude. Final update. 6 months later, the dust had settled into a new normal that none of us had expected. The mortgage situation had been resolved, but not in the way anyone had anticipated. My sister had indeed sold the jet ski, but the financial loss was significant. She'd recovered only $12,000 of her $18,000 investment. However, the sale had been symbolic as much as practical. It represented her commitment to prioritizing family stability over impulsive spending, and it gave her some ownership in solving the problem she'd helped create. More surprisingly, Mom had decided to downsize. She'd realized that keeping the 4-bedroom house was impractical for her financial situation and had found a smaller place that she could afford independently. The equity from the house sale had been enough to buy the new place outright and leave a small emergency fund. My uncle had played a crucial role in mediating these decisions, helping Mom see that financial independence was better than financial dependence, even when the dependence came with love attached. He'd also helped my sister establish better financial boundaries and accountability systems to manage her spending during manic episodes. As for my relationship with them, it was different now, more honest, but also more conditional. We no longer operated under the assumption that family meant unlimited obligation. Instead, we developed explicit conversations about expectations, boundaries, and reciprocity. I'd learned that my generosity had sometimes enabled poor decision-making rather than helping solve underlying problems. They'd learned that my financial success didn't make me immune to emotional needs or exempt from family consideration. The promotion celebration never got rescheduled. That moment had passed, but I'd stopped feeling bitter about it. Instead, I'd used the experience to clarify my own priorities and boundaries. I'd taken the European vacation I'd been postponing, bought better furniture for my apartment, and started seriously looking at houses for myself. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between supporting family and subsidizing dysfunction. The former strengthens relationships, the latter corrodes them. My willingness to sacrifice had been genuine, but it had also been naive about the long-term consequences of creating financial dependency. 6 months after that devastating text message, we were still family, but we were family with boundaries, expectations, and mutual respect. It wasn't the unconditional support system I'd thought I wanted, but it was healthier and more sustainable than what we'd had before. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their worst instincts, even when that refusal forces everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about dependency, entitlement, and the real meaning of mutual support. The 17 missed calls had marked the end of one version of our family dynamic and the beginning of a more honest, if more complicated, relationship. It wasn't the family I'd thought I had, but it was the family we could actually be, with work, boundaries, and genuine respect for each other's contributions and limitations.